A security officer at the airport decided to humiliate a woman, detaining her for no reason and breaking every rule of inspection. He crossed the line without realizing who he was dealing with. Just seconds later, the situation spun completely out of his control, and the entire airport froze at what happened next. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from. The city was barely awake when Ronda pulled into the upper deck of LAX, the morning haze still clinging to the skyline like a restless ghost. The clock on her dashboard blinked 6:12 a.m., and she could feel every minute slipping through her fingers like sand. The interstate had been jammed, a sea of brake lights and honking horns, and now even the air in the parking structure felt heavy with pressure and exhaust. She cut the engine, grabbed her bag, and started toward the terminal with that silent, urgent stride she'd learned years ago, one that carried purpose, not panic. Inside, the terminal hummed with the muffled energy of early travel. Announcements echoed through the wide glass hall, boarding calls, gate changes, polite warnings about unattended baggage. Rolling suitcases trailed behind weary passengers like metallic tails. Somewhere nearby, a child cried. Somewhere else, a man laughed too loudly into a phone. Ronda adjusted her jacket and moved toward the check-in kiosks, her duffel slung over one shoulder, her ID already in hand. She was running late for a flight to New York, where she was supposed to appear at a charity event for veterans, a cause that mattered more to her than the cameras that would surely be waiting there. When the kiosk refused to scan her passport on the first try, she exhaled slowly and forced herself to smile at the attendant who approached to help. The young woman recognized her immediately, eyes widening with that mix of admiration and disbelief that fame always triggered in strangers. "I'm a huge fan," she whispered, fingers shaking slightly as she typed in Ronda's confirmation code. "I watched all your fights. You were amazing." Ronda gave her a tired but genuine smile. "Thank you. Just trying to get to New York in one piece." The boarding pass printed with a soft click, and Ronda slipped it into her jacket pocket. One obstacle down. But as she turned toward security, she noticed the line an endless, winding maze of bodies that snaked across the polished floor. It moved at the pace of glaciers, every traveler inching forward with the resigned shuffle of the sleep-deprived. The overhead clock read 6:26. Her flight was boarding in 50 minutes. If she didn't get through security soon, she'd miss it. She joined the line, keeping her composure. Years of martial arts training had taught her patience breathing through tension, mastering the rhythm of waiting. The air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Somewhere behind her, a businessman cursed under his breath about delays. Ahead, a woman fumbled with her boarding pass, dropping it twice. Ronda stood silently, her eyes scanning the movement of the TSA officers at the checkpoint ahead. She didn't like the way one of them kept pacing back and forth, his voice sharp, impatient. The line beside hers seemed to be moving faster, but she stayed put. Losing her cool would only draw attention. Two men a few places ahead turned to look at her. The taller one nudged the other, smirking. "Hey, isn't that Ronda Rousey?" he muttered, not quietly enough. "Didn't think she still did anything. Guess she's flying coach like the rest of us." Ronda's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She'd learned long ago that silence was often the most effective answer. Still, she could feel their eyes lingering on her back, as though her very presence was some kind of challenge. She ignored it, staring straight ahead until the line moved again. When she finally reached the conveyor belt, she slipped off her jacket, shoes, and placed her bag on the tray. Her movements were efficient, practiced precise without aggression. She stepped through the metal detector, expecting the usual quick green light, the familiar beep that marked another mundane clearance. Instead, the machine emitted a sharp, high-pitched tone. Red light. The officer at the station, a broad-shouldered man with a neatly trimmed beard and an expression that managed to be both bored and condescending, glanced up at her. His name tag read, Kinner, R. "Ma'am," he said, his voice too slow to be casual. "Step aside for a moment." Ronda frowned. "Is there a problem?" He looked at the monitor, then back at her. "Metal detection alert. Could be your jewelry. Could be the underwire in your..." He paused deliberately, eyes flicking downward before he caught himself. "Garments. We'll need to do a secondary scan." "I don't have any metal," Ronda said, her tone calm but firm. Then I'm sure this'll be quick, Kinner replied, gesturing toward the glass partition. His smirk was small, but it was there. The kind of smirk that wasn't about procedure, but power. Behind her, the line slowed, curious eyes turning toward the scene. The whisper started again. Someone recognized her, murmuring about how the UFC girl was getting stopped. Ronda exhaled through her nose and stepped where he indicated. The hand scanner passed up and down her arms and torso, producing nothing. Still, Kinner didn't waver through. Unusual, he murmured. Might be a calibration issue. He lifted his radio to his mouth. Control, we have a code 6 discrepancy at lane 4. Requesting confirmation for secondary. Ronda folded her arms. That's really not necessary. Regulations, ma'am. His tone hardened slightly, a quiet edge creeping in. You'll need to come with me. A younger officer nearby glanced uncertainly at Kinner. Sir, it's probably just a false. Kinner's eyes cut toward him, and the man fell silent. Then he looked back at Ronda. It'll only take a moment. You can cooperate here, or we can make it official. Something in his phrasing, make it official, sent a flicker of unease down her spine. Not fear, but recognition. She had dealt with men like him before. The ones who hid their insecurities behind authority, who thrived on the small, controllable humiliations they could inflict on others. She thought of arguing, demanding a supervisor, but that would take longer, maybe delay her flight for hours. She unclenched her jaw and nodded once. Lead the way. He motioned for her to follow, his tone overly polite now, almost mocking. This way, Ms. Rousey. The way he said her name wasn't respect, it was ownership, as though he was pleased to be the one holding the leash. They passed through a door marked Authorized Personnel Only, the hallway beyond dim and sterile. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering slightly at the edges. The sound of rolling luggage and distant boarding announcements faded behind them, replaced by the echo of their footsteps. The narrow corridor led to a small waiting area with plastic chairs and a table stacked with forms. A second officer stood there, arms folded, clearly uncomfortable. Kinner waved him off. I'll handle this one. Ronda stopped. You said this would be quick. He turned toward her with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. It will be. I just need to follow the full protocol. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Fine. Let's get it over with. Of course, he said softly, his tone sliding towards something almost intimate. Right this way. As she stepped into the small inspection room beyond, the door clicked shut behind her with the soft finality of a lock. The air was colder here, thinner somehow. She could see her reflection in the stainless steel surface of the inspection table, expression controlled, shoulders square, eyes calm. But beneath the surface of that calm, something older and sharper began to stir. She had been through 1,000 tests in her life. This one, she suspected, would not be about metal detectors or missed flights. And as the officer reached for the gloves on the counter, with a self-satisfied smile, Ronda realized this was no longer just about getting to New York on time. It was about control and who would have it when this was over. The room smelled faintly of metal polish and disinfectant. A hum from the air conditioner filled the silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of paper. Ronda stood still, arms crossed loosely over her chest, her boarding pass folded in her hand. Across from her, Officer R. Kinner adjusted his gloves with deliberate slowness, the latex snapping lightly against his wrists. His movements were precise, almost ritualistic, as if each gesture existed to remind her who was in charge here. This will only take a minute, he said, his tone smooth, too calm. Just standard procedure for anomalies on the scanner. You'd be surprised how often even the smallest metallic trace sets it off. I travel through airports every month, Ronda replied evenly. I've never had a problem. He smiled faintly. Well, maybe today's the day. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't answer. She was still trying to keep this from escalating. The flight was boarding in less than 40 minutes. If she made a scene, she'd be the headline of every gossip feed before noon. She'd spent years trying to shed the old image, the hot-headed fighter, the woman who exploded when pushed. She wasn't that person anymore. She reminded herself of that now. Kinner began to circle her like a wolf evaluating its prey. His radio buzzed, but he ignored it. The other officer, the younger one, hovered uncertainly in the doorway, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Rhonda noticed his discomfort. He didn't like what was happening either, but he wasn't about to challenge his superior. Kinner's voice cut through the air. "Please raise your arms." Rhonda did as told. The handheld scanner beeped softly as he ran it along her sides, shoulders, down her torso. It emitted no warning tone. He frowned slightly, pretending to check the device, then continued. "Sometimes these things miss areas," he muttered. "I'll have to do a physical check." She blinked, surprised. "You already scanned me." "It's protocol," he said, his mouth curling slightly around the word. "Don't worry, I'll be professional." There was no mistaking the tone, the arrogance, the testing. She clenched her jaw. "Then keep it professional," she said quietly. "Oh, of course," he answered. "Always." His hands moved closer than necessary, brushing along the sides of her ribs under the pretext of verifying a signal. She caught the faintest hint of cologne mixed with sweat. His touch lingered a second too long, the kind of contact meant to humiliate while pretending innocence. He leaned in slightly, his breath brushing her ear as he murmured, "You keep in good shape." The words hit like grit against her skin. She took a step back. "I think we're done." Kinner straightened, his smile tightening. "Not quite. There's still an alert on the screen." "There's no alert. I saw the monitor." He ignored that, gesturing toward her waist. "It's probably something near your belt line. We'll need to confirm manually." Rhonda's pulse ticked once, hard. She inhaled deeply through her nose. "Then call a female officer," she said, her tone steady, measured. Kinner chuckled softly. "All the ladies are occupied. I can assure you, I'm qualified." Her patience was wearing thin. "You're about to cross a line you can't walk back from." The younger officer in the doorway cleared his throat. "Sir, maybe I can—" Kinner turned sharply. "I said I've got it." The boy froze. Rhonda could feel the atmosphere thickening, her body already calculating distance, weight, leverage. She didn't want this to become physical, not here, but she could sense what he was trying to do. Slowly strip her of control, make her react so he could claim she was the problem. He moved closer, pretending to adjust his glove again, then ran his hand slowly along her hip under the pretext of checking for a hidden object. "You never know what people hide," he murmured. That was it. Her hand shot out, gripping his wrist with just enough pressure to stop him cold. The shift was instantaneous. The playfulness drained from his face, replaced by a flicker of something uglier, shock, then anger. "Remove your hand," she said quietly. "You're interfering with a federal inspection," he hissed. "I said remove it." The air in the room grew razor thin. The fluorescent lights hummed louder, or maybe it was just her heartbeat. The younger officer took an uncertain step forward, caught between two instincts obeying orders and stopping something that had gone too far. Kinner yanked his hand free and straightened, his voice rising just enough to echo off the metal surfaces. "You're being uncooperative, Ms. Rousey. I can escalate this. You want that?" Her voice remained low, controlled. "You're already escalating it." For a moment, they stood in silence. Predator and prey, though it was no longer clear who was which. Then, in an exaggerated show of restraint, he took a step back and picked up his radio again. "We'll take this to private screening," he said, pressing the button. "Secondary room." Her eyes didn't move from his face. "That's what this already is." "This one's more thorough," he said, his tone chillingly pleasant. "Please follow me." The younger officer's face went pale, but he didn't speak. Rhonda watched him for a fraction of a second before following Kinner out. They moved down another sterile corridor. The airport's background noise, the rolling wheels, the chatter, the airport announcements grew distant again, replaced by the hollow echo of their footsteps. Somewhere far off, a plane roared to life. Rhonda walked half a pace behind him, her mind quiet but sharp, cataloging every turn, every camera. She noted that one of the overhead domes wasn't lit. She could already tell where this was headed, and her muscles itched with readiness. They reached a narrow metal door with a keypad. Kinner tapped in a code and gestured her inside. The room beyond was smaller, colder, no windows, just gray walls, a metal table, in a single plastic chair. She stopped at the threshold. "You're going too far." He turned toward her, that same infuriating calm spreading across his features. "I'm doing my job." "No, you're enjoying it." He tilted his head, pretending to be offended. "You think too highly of yourself." She met his gaze. "You're about to find out I don't need to." He smirked again, but there was hesitation now. He wasn't used to someone standing their ground this way. He gestured for her to set her bag down on the table, then moved to block the door. "You can relax, Ms. Rousey. Nobody's trying to hurt you." "I know," she said softly, "because I wouldn't let them." For the first time, his smile faltered. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, one of them flickering faintly. The younger officer hadn't followed this time. The hallway beyond the closed door was empty. Kinner leaned against the table, arms crossed, studying her. "You know," he said, almost conversationally, "I used to watch your fights. You had this thing anger, I think. Fire. Everyone loved it. Shame to see it gone." She didn't respond. "I always wondered," he continued, voice lower now, "what did it take to bring that back?" Something inside her stilled. It was no longer about inconvenience or authority. It was about something more primal, dominance disguised as procedure. She'd faced opponents in cages and arenas, men who wanted to hurt her to prove something to themselves. She knew this energy. The difference was those fights had rules. This didn't. Ronda glanced at the clock on the wall. Her flight would begin boarding in 20 minutes. Every second of this was a test, a deliberate attempt to provoke. She decided she would give him exactly what he asked for, but on her terms. "Do your check," she said flatly. He smiled again, stepping closer. The door clicked shut behind him. The air between them was taut as wire, the hum of the light deepening like a warning. Ronda's hands hung loose at her sides, her stance casual but balanced. She'd waited, endured, given him every chance to stop. But as his gloved hand brushed her waist again, deliberately slow, that last fragile thread of restraint began to fray. "Let's make this quick," she said. "Oh, don't worry," Kinner murmured. "I know what I'm doing." Her eyes darkened. "So do I." He didn't see the shift in her weight, the subtle tightening of muscle in her right arm, the way her body aligned itself for precision, not rage. He didn't understand that she had already moved past fear. He would. Outside in the sterile hallway, the world continued as if nothing was happening. A security announcement, a rolling suitcase, a family laughing near a gate. Inside, a silence thicker than air gathered between predator and prey. And somewhere, deep in that silence, something inside Ronda Rousey began to wake. The moment the door sealed shut, the room seemed to shrink. The hum of the ventilation unit was the only sound, steady and low, as if it too were holding its breath. The walls were a dull, sterile gray, interrupted only by a security poster that hung crookedly on one side and a flickering fluorescent bulb that threw uneven light across the floor. Ronda stood at the center, motionless, her eyes fixed on the officer who had brought her here. Kinner stepped closer, snapping on a new pair of gloves. The soft crack of latex against his skin echoed louder than it should have. He moved with a deliberate ease, each motion soaked in quiet arrogance. "This'll take a few minutes," he said, the corners of his mouth twitching into a smirk that didn't belong to professionalism. "Standard extended procedure. I'll make it painless." Ronda said nothing. Her pulse was calm, steady, but she watched everything, his stance, the position of his hands, the distance between them. Years in the octagon had trained her to read people in ways they could never imagine. Beneath his composure, she could already sense the restlessness, the tension of someone who thrived on control. He began with questions, pretending to fill a form on his clipboard. "Destination?" he asked. "New York." "Purpose of travel?" "Charity work." "Occupation?" "You already know." He looked up from his clipboard, eyes meeting hers. "Remind me." Ronda tilted her head slightly. "Fighter? Retired." His mouth curved. "Right, the tough one." He set the clipboard aside. "Let's see if that toughness holds up when there aren't cameras." For a brief moment, she almost pitied him, the way men like him mistook cruelty for power, as though authority gave them permission to forget decency. Almost. He circled behind her, pretending to scan her back, the metal detector humming faintly. It didn't beep, but he ran it again anyway, slower this time. Sometimes these things miss small items, he murmured. Could be a clasp, a hairpin, or something you're hiding. I told you I'm not carrying anything, Rhonda said, her voice even. He lowered the device, placing it on the table. Then you won't mind if I double-check manually. She turned slightly, eyes sharp. You've already checked enough. He smiled as if amused by her defiance. That's for me to decide. She inhaled slowly, her jaw tightening. She could feel her body shifting, the subtle muscle memory awakening beneath the calm. Her stance changed without thought, weight balanced, knees soft, hands loose. Years of discipline, coiling in silence. Kinner moved closer, the air between them thickening. His gloved hand brushed her waist again, pausing there longer than necessary. Turn around, he ordered quietly. Rhonda's gaze didn't waver. No. The word hung in the air like a spark before the fire. His expression hardened, the mask of politeness cracking. You don't make the rules here, Ms. Rousey. I do. He reached for her shoulder, intending to force her around, but her arm shot up instinctively. She caught his wrist before his hand even made contact, the motion fluid, effortless. The sound of latex stretching echoed between them. I said don't touch me, she said quietly. Let go, he snapped, trying to yank free. Her grip tightened just enough to make him wince. You've had your chance to stop. His face darkened, the thin line between arrogance and fear beginning to blur. You're assaulting a federal officer. No, she said, her voice still low. You assaulted me. The fluorescent light above them flickered again, and for a moment the shadows in the room seemed to move. The silence stretched thin. Then he lunged. It wasn't a real attack, more of a desperate grab for control, but to Rhonda, it was all she needed. She sidestepped, pivoted, and redirected his momentum. His arm twisted awkwardly, and his body slammed into the edge of the table with a dull metallic thud. The clipboard clattered to the floor, pages scattering like startled birds. He gasped, trying to recover, but she had already locked his arm in place, her hand pressing down with just enough pressure to immobilize without breaking. Stay down, she warned. Let me go, he hissed, his voice breaking through clenched teeth. Not until you understand what restraint means. He tried to push up with his free arm, but she shifted her weight, pressing his shoulder into the metal surface. His face reddened, his breath quickened. You think you can do this and walk out? He spat. You're done. Maybe, she said, but not today. The door creaked suddenly. The younger officer, the one who'd been hesitant before, appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. For a heartbeat, he froze at the sight before him, his superior pinned, the famous Ronda Rousey calm and unmoving above him. Call your supervisor, Rhonda said without looking up. The younger man hesitated. I need to. Now, she ordered. Her tone was quiet but absolute. He fumbled for his radio, voice shaking as he called for backup. Somewhere down the hall, muffled footsteps began to echo. Rhonda released Kinner just enough for him to breathe, then stepped back, her hands visible and open. She wanted everything to be seen clearly when the others arrived. Kinner pushed himself upright, clutching his wrist. His face was flushed with fury and humiliation. You're going to regret this, he growled. I doubt it, she replied. He took a step toward her, but the sound of approaching boots in the corridor made him stop. The door burst open, and two more officers entered, weapons drawn but uncertain. Rhonda didn't move. Her posture was steady, her breathing calm. She attacked me, Kinner barked. She resisted and assaulted an officer. One of the newcomers looked from him to her. Is that true? Rhonda's gaze was steady. The camera in the hallway can tell you exactly what happened before we came in here. The one in this room, however, doesn't work. Convenient, isn't it? The officers exchanged glances. One of them stepped to the wall, inspecting the dark lens above the door. No light, no recording. The younger officer, still at the doorway, swallowed hard. She asked for a female screener, he said quietly. He didn't call one. Kinner spun on him. You shut your mouth. That's enough, said one of the senior officers sharply. Everyone out. The tension drained slightly, though Kinner's glare still burned. Rhonda picked up her boarding pass from the table and handed it to the nearest officer. "You can search it again if you want. I'm not hiding anything, but I won't be touched like that again." There was silence. Then slowly one of them nodded. "Understood." As they led her back toward the main corridor, she could feel the tremor of adrenaline beginning to settle beneath her skin. The world outside the screening room seemed almost too bright after the cold gray inside. Travelers moved past, oblivious. Children laughed. A barista shouted an order. Life went on. Behind her, voices rose, angry, defensive, bureaucratic, but she didn't look back. In the reflection of the glass wall near the boarding gates, she saw her own face calm, unflinching. She didn't see rage there, or fear, only the quiet steadiness of someone who had faced worse and refused to bow. She straightened her jacket, exhaled, and began to walk. The boarding announcement for her flight echoed overhead, distant and calm, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. But as she moved toward the gate, she knew this was far from over. There would be questions, reports, investigations. And yet, for the first time that morning, she felt completely in control. The echo of boots faded down the corridor, leaving the room in a heavy, suspended silence. Rhonda stood just beyond the doorway, her heart still steady, her breath deep and controlled. The fluorescent light hummed above her, cold and indifferent. Behind her, Kinner's voice crackled with anger and disbelief as the senior officers began questioning him, but she paid no attention. For the moment, she needed distance, not from the chaos, but from the part of herself that had nearly snapped. She had warned him. She had given him every opportunity to stop. He hadn't listened. And now he was learning the hard way what it meant to mistake calm for weakness. A supervisor arrived, an older man with graying temples and the practiced neutrality of someone who had seen too many incidents to be surprised anymore. "Ms. Rousey," he said, his voice measured, "please wait in the observation area while we review what happened." She nodded. "Fine." He gestured to a seat near the corridor, and she sat, crossing her arms loosely. Through the small glass pane of the screening room door, she could see Kinner gesturing wildly, his face flushed, his mouth twisting around words she couldn't hear. The younger officer stood near the corner, rigid, uncertain. It didn't matter now. The truth was already unraveling, and Kinner's control was slipping with it. When the supervisor stepped into the room, the tone shifted. His questions were direct, clipped. Kinner tried to defend himself, pointing to his injured wrist, claiming she had attacked him without provocation. But the younger officer spoke up, then hesitant at first, then firmer, explaining what he'd seen. The missing camera, the denial of a female screener, the extended contact. Each word chipped away at Kinner's authority like a slow chisel against stone. Rhonda watched through the glass, expression unreadable. She didn't need to gloat. The facts would do that for her. The supervisor emerged 10 minutes later, his face grim but composed. "Ms. Rousey, we'll need a brief statement for the report," he said. "After that, you're free to go." She rose. "And him?" He hesitated. "That's being handled internally." Rhonda studied him for a long moment. "You've got cameras out there. Use them." "We are," he assured her. Inside the room, Kinner shouted something she couldn't make out. Two security staff moved closer to him, ready if he lost control. She turned away. It wasn't her fight anymore, not physically, but the dull ache in her stomach told her it wasn't finished either. They led her to a small office where a security officer, a woman this time, handed her a form and asked her to recount the event. Rhonda spoke plainly, her tone calm, deliberate. No exaggerations, no emotion. She explained every action, the warning she'd given, his refusal to stop, the use of force purely in defense. The officer typed in silence, occasionally glancing up with something that might have been respect. When it was done, Rhonda signed the document and pushed it forward. "I want a copy." "Of course." The woman printed one and handed it over. "You can board your flight now, Ms. Rousey. We're truly sorry this happened." Rhonda gave a short nod. "Don't apologize to me. Just make sure it doesn't happen to someone else." As she stepped back into the main terminal, the world felt painfully normal again. The smell of coffee and perfume, the chatter of travelers, the rhythmic clatter of luggage wheels. It was as if the last hour had been some feverish illusion confined to a sterile gray room. Yet the stiffness in her shoulders, the faint tremor beneath her skin, told her it was very real. She passed a family at the check-in counter, a mother kneeling to fix her daughter's backpack strap. A businessman barked into his phone nearby, arguing about a missed connection. None of them knew what had just happened a few hundred feet away. None of them knew that for a moment, the line between power and violation had been drawn and erased in the same breath. At the gate, her flight number glowed on the monitor, the word boarding in bright letters. She joined the short queue, still silent. A gate agent scanned her pass, her eyes flickering with recognition. "Oh my God," she whispered under her breath. "You're just a passenger?" Rhonda interrupted softly, her voice even. The agent blinked, embarrassed. "Right, of course. Have a good flight." As Rhonda walked down the jet bridge, the metallic clank of her boots against the floor echoed faintly, rhythmic, steady. But just before she reached the aircraft door, a sharp voice called from behind. "Ms. Rousey." She turned. The supervisor from before was hurrying toward her, breathing slightly heavier from the run. He stopped a few steps away, holding out a small envelope. "We found this in the inspection room. Your phone." Rhonda took it. "Thanks." He hesitated, his gaze uncertain. "For what it's worth, you did the right thing." She met his eyes, expression neutral. "Then make sure your system does too." He nodded, a faint shadow of guilt crossing his face, and stepped back as she boarded the plane. Inside, she found her seat by the window. The hum of the engines filled the air, blending with the murmur of passengers settling in. The plane smelled of recycled air and faint citrus disinfectant. She placed her phone in her jacket pocket and looked out at the runway, where the sun was beginning to climb above the horizon, washing the tarmac in pale gold. She closed her eyes briefly. Images from the past hour flickered through her mind, the sound of latex snapping, the glint in Kinner's eyes, the metallic slam of the table. She'd handled it, but she couldn't shake the thought that somewhere, another woman might not have been able to. That thought stayed with her, heavier than anger. When the flight attendant came by with a soft smile offering water, Rhonda took it and whispered a quiet thanks. Her voice felt rough in her throat. She didn't want to talk. Not yet. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their departure. As the plane began to taxi, she caught a final glimpse of the terminal through the oval window. A few police officers stood near the security wing, their posture tense, their radios crackling. She couldn't hear the words, but she could imagine the conversations that would follow the reports, the justifications, the denials. She turned away from the window. When the engines roared and the aircraft lifted, the city fell away beneath her, a blur of light and structure swallowed by clouds. For a fleeting moment, everything grew still. The tension drained from her shoulders, replaced by a quiet, fragile calm. She rested her head against the seat and exhaled. The sky outside was endless and white, stretching far beyond the horizon. Somewhere far below, the investigation was already beginning. The cameras would be reviewed, statements written, careers possibly ended. But none of that mattered now. She had done what she came here to do. She had protected herself. For the first time since she'd entered that terminal, she allowed herself to breathe without restraint. And though she knew the battle wasn't truly over, she had already won the one that mattered most. By the time the plane touched down in New York, the sun had climbed high enough to cast the city in a clear, uncompromising light. From her window seat, Rhonda watched the skyline drift by, tall glass towers glinting like watchful sentinels. The descent was smooth, but her body carried the stiffness of tension held too long. She hadn't slept during the flight, only rested with her eyes closed, reliving each second of what had happened. Every sound, every word, every shift of tone from that sterile room replayed in her mind with a precision she couldn't stop. She hadn't lost control, but the memory of almost doing so clung to her like smoke. The moment her phone reconnected, notifications poured in. Missed calls, unread messages, news alerts. She ignored them at first, but curiosity eventually won. The headlines were already circulating. Ronda Rousey involved in airport altercation. Some outlets were careful, others not. One claimed she'd attacked a TSA officer. Another called it an incident of misunderstanding. They all agreed on one thing: her name was once again attached to conflict. She sighed and locked the screen. It didn't matter what they said now. She knew the truth. Inside the terminal, a uniformed woman from airport security approached her near the baggage claim. Her tone was polite but heavy with subtext. "Ms. Rousey, do you have a moment?" Rhonda turned slowly, keeping her voice even. "If this is about LAX, I've already given my statement." "Yes, ma'am," the woman said. "The Department of Transportation's Internal Affairs Division would like a brief follow-up. They'll reach out formally, but they've requested to verify your contact details." Rhonda gave them, short and precise. "Anything else?" The woman hesitated. "No, ma'am, just, for what it's worth, I'm sorry for what you went through." Rhonda studied her face for a beat, then nodded once. "Make sure it doesn't happen again. That's apology enough." Outside, New York was bright and loud. Every street alive with horns, engines, voices. Her car was waiting, sent by the charity organization she was working with. The driver, an older man in a blue cap, opened the door with a warm smile. "Ms. Rousey, pleasure to meet you. Heard you had a rough morning out west." She froze for a fraction of a second. "Already?" He chuckled softly. "News travels fast these days." Rhonda slid into the back seat without answering. She didn't want sympathy, and she didn't want gossip. The city sped past in flashes of motion billboards, bridges, rows of cabs. She closed her eyes and leaned her head back. By the time they arrived at the hotel, her phone was vibrating again. This time it was an unknown number. She answered, her tone neutral. "Ms. Rousey, this is Captain Drew Walters, Airport Division Internal Affairs. I'd like to discuss the events at LAX." She sat on the edge of the bed, her posture straightening. "I've already filed a report." "Yes, and we've reviewed it," Walters replied. "There's also footage from the corridor camera that supports your version. We'd just like to fill in a few details. Off the record, I want you to know the agent involved, Officer Kinner, has been suspended pending investigation." Rhonda exhaled through her nose. "Good. There's something else," he continued. "Your restraint in handling the situation is being noted in the official record. That'll make a difference." "I didn't show restraint for a report," she said. "I did it because it was the right thing to do." There was a pause on the other end. "Understood, ma'am. We'll contact you if we need a formal follow-up." She ended the call and sat there in silence for a long moment. The hum of the city seeped through the window. In the distance, sirens wailed faintly, swallowed by traffic noise. For the first time since morning, she felt the exhaustion hit her fully. Her hands trembled slightly when she unzipped her bag. It wasn't fear, just the aftermath of holding herself together for too long. She showered, changed, and met with the charity coordinators that afternoon. Cameras flashed when she entered the hall, reporters already whispering at the back of the room. She kept her expression neutral, her movements precise. Every handshake, every polite smile was armor now. People didn't ask about her talk on empowerment or the foundation's work. They wanted to know about the airport, about the officer, about her temper. A journalist tried to corner her as she stepped off the stage. "Ms. Rousey, can you comment on the incident?" "No," she said simply without breaking stride. "I'm here for something more important." The journalist followed for another few steps, his voice rising. "There are claims you used excessive force." She stopped then, turning just enough for her eyes to meet his. "If defending myself from harassment is excessive, maybe that's the problem you should be reporting on." He fell silent, pen frozen midair. She walked away. That night her manager called. "You made headlines again," he said. "Social media's a storm. Half the people are defending you, the other half are calling it assault." Rhonda rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Then half the people finally learned what the other half ignores. Do you want me to draft a statement?" "No, the truth doesn't need one." There was a pause. "You okay?" "I've been worse," she said. She hung up and went to the window. The city glittered below her, endless and restless, like it never slept because it couldn't. Her reflection in the glass looked calm, but she could see the flicker behind her eyes, a quiet defiance that refused to die down. Somewhere out there, Kinner was probably sitting in an interrogation room, giving the same empty excuses he'd thrown at her about protocol, about procedure. She could imagine the look on his face when the footage played, when the younger officer spoke, when the supervisor confirmed the reports. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like justice clawing its way through bureaucracy 1 inch at a time. The next morning, she received an official email from the airport administration. It was short. "We extend our formal apology for the misconduct you experienced at LAX. Measures are being taken to ensure accountability and prevent recurrence." She read it once, then deleted it. By evening, reporters had moved on to other stories. The world spun fast, and outrage never stayed long in one place. But inside her, something had shifted. She no longer carried the quiet guilt she once felt for being strong, for reacting, for fighting back. The control she'd held so tightly through those sterile hallways now felt less like restraint and more like clarity. When she looked at herself in the mirror before bed, she didn't see the fighter the headlines always resurrected, the symbol of aggression they used when they wanted controversy. She saw a woman who had refused to surrender her dignity, even when it would have been easier to stay silent. The reflection stared back at her, steady and grounded. Tomorrow would bring new noise, new versions of the same story. But it didn't matter. For the first time in a long while, she felt peace, not the fragile kind that comes from stillness, but the unbreakable one that comes from surviving. Morning came with a gray sky and the low hum of New York traffic bleeding through the hotel windows. Rhonda woke before dawn, her body still running on discipline more than rest. The city was already alive beneath her, restless and unyielding. She sat by the window with a cup of black coffee, watching pedestrians blur past below, and for the first time since the incident at the airport, she allowed herself to feel everything she had been holding back. The anger, the fatigue, the strange, quiet pride. It all swirled inside her like the aftershock of a storm. The night before, she had deleted every message about the news coverage, every call from journalists, every offer to tell her side. She didn't want to be anyone's story anymore. What had happened didn't need headlines. It needed consequences. Her phone buzzed softly. The caller ID showed a number from Los Angeles International Airport. She hesitated for a moment, then answered. The voice on the other end was calm, older, professional. "Ms. Rousey, this is Captain Walters again. I wanted to inform you personally. The internal investigation is complete." Rhonda's voice was even. "And? The officer has been terminated. There will also be formal disciplinary hearings regarding supervisory negligence. The report concludes that you acted in lawful self-defense under provocation." He paused before adding, "The footage and witness statements made that clear." Rhonda looked down at the mug in her hands, steam curling softly from its surface. "I see," she said. "We'll be making a public statement later today," Walters continued. "It will clear your name officially, but I thought you deserved to hear it first." "Thank you," she replied quietly. He hesitated again, his tone softening. "You should know, Ms. Rousey, that your conduct is being discussed in more than just our department. People are calling it restraint under fire. It's rare." "I wasn't trying to be rare," she said. "Just right." But he seemed to consider that, then simply said, "Good luck, ma'am," and hung up. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean, like the air after rain. She set the mug down and let herself breathe. There was a strange calm in knowing it was over, not in the sense of closure, but of balance restored. What had been wrong was corrected, not by rage, not by force, but by truth finally surfacing. Later that day, she attended the scheduled charity event. The hall was filled with children, volunteers, and families who had no idea what kind of week she just endured. They saw her as the champion who came to speak about perseverance, about finding strength in adversity. And for the first time, her words didn't feel rehearsed. When she stepped up to the microphone, she looked at the crowd and saw faces that mirrored every struggle she'd ever fought. Through people who had been silenced, dismissed, underestimated, she began softly, her voice steady but caring. "Sometimes strength isn't about what you can do in a fight. Sometimes it's about what you don't allow others to take from you." The room fell into attentive quiet. "Dignity," she continued, "isn't given. It's something you guard, every day, no matter who tries to take it away." When the applause came, it wasn't thunderous. It was real. A deep, resonant sound that came from understanding, not spectacle. Rhonda smiled faintly, bowing her head in quiet gratitude. After the event, she walked outside into the brisk afternoon air. The city was alive with rhythm car horns, distant sirens, laughter from a nearby cafe. She pulled her coat tighter and walked without direction, blending into the crowd. No one stopped her for pictures. No one stared. For once, she wasn't the fighter or the celebrity. She was just another face in the current of the world. Her path took her through Central Park, where bare trees clawed gently at the overcast sky. She sat on a bench near the lake, the same bench she'd used years ago when she was first training in New York, back when the world was louder and she had thought that every battle had to be fought in the ring. Now she knew better. The hardest ones happened in silence, in small, locked rooms where no cameras rolled. A familiar voice startled her thoughts. "Didn't expect to find you here." She turned. It was Derek, an old friend from her training days, now working in law enforcement. He stood with 2 coffees in his hands, one extended toward her. "Heard about what happened," he said. "Had to see for myself that you were still in one piece." Ronda accepted the cup with a faint smile. "I'm fine." "Fine," he repeated, settling beside her. "That word's doing a lot of work lately." They sat in silence for a while, watching a group of joggers pass by. Finally, he said, "You know, you could have gone public with this. Press charges, sued, made it loud. Why didn't you?" She stared ahead, her tone thoughtful. "Because loud doesn't always fix things. Sometimes it just feeds the noise. I didn't want revenge. I wanted it to stop." He nodded slowly. "Well, you made it stop. That counts for something." "I hope it does," she said. "For the next person, at least." They talked a while longer, about the city, about old memories, about how strange it felt to always be seen as a symbol instead of a person. When he finally left, the park had begun to thin out, the light shifting toward dusk. Ronda lingered there a little longer, letting the chill air bite gently at her skin. Her thoughts drifted to the officer whose arrogance had shattered his own career, to the younger guard who'd found his courage at the right time, to the supervisor who had chosen fairness over loyalty. Everyone had played a part, even if they didn't know it. She stood at last, slipping her hands into her coat pockets, and began to walk again. The city lights flickered to life one by one, scattered jewels against the gray. Somewhere out there, headlines were being written, opinions formed, stories spun, but she was beyond caring. She didn't need vindication anymore. She'd already reclaimed what mattered most. As she crossed the street, a gust of wind swept through, carrying the scent of rain and asphalt. She tilted her face upward, eyes half closed. The world moved on, relentless and beautiful, and she moved with it. Later, back in her hotel room, she placed her phone face down on the desk and opened the window. The night air filled the room, cool and clean. She leaned against the frame, looking out at the shimmering grid of city lights. Somewhere down there, someone was being underestimated, pushed, cornered. Somewhere, another quiet line was being drawn. Ronda smiled faintly to herself. She wasn't angry anymore. She was awake, aware, unshaken. For the first time in years, she felt like herself, not the fighter, not the headline, not the story, just Ronda. And that, she realized, was the truest victory of all. If this story kept you watching till the end, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. There are even more shocking stories coming your way. Don't stop here. Watch the next video on your screen. You won't believe what happens next. And if this video hit you hard, share it with someone who needs to see it too.